Although the region around Paris has been inhabited for nearly 10,000 years, the origins of the city as we know it trace back to a Gallic tribe called the Parisii, who settled along the river Seine between roughly 250 and 225 BC. Their settlement, originally known as Lutetia, became strategically important due to its position on key north-south trade routes connecting northern Europe with the Mediterranean. This advantage allowed the settlement to grow in wealth and even mint its own gold coins. However, this prosperity eventually attracted the attention of the expanding Roman Republic. During Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul in the 50s BC, Roman forces reached Lutetia. In 52 BC, a decisive battle took place near the settlement where the Romans defeated the Parisii and their allied tribes. Following their victory, the Romans established a new city called Lutetia Parisiorum. The Roman city was developed on the left bank of the Seine and built according to a typical Roman grid layout. It featured a forum, temples, and public buildings such as a basilica. By the 1st century AD, an amphitheater capable of holding around 15,000 spectators was constructed, despite the city's relatively small population of about 8,000 residents. Lutetia expanded during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, though it remained secondary to major Roman centers like Lugdunum, modern Lyon. A turning point came in the mid-3rd century, when Christianity began spreading in the region, traditionally linked to Saint Denis, who was said to have been executed for his faith. His burial site later became the location of a major religious landmark, forming the foundation of what is now the Basilica of Saint Denis. As the Western Roman Empire weakened in the late 3rd century, the city faced increasing raids from migrating tribes. In response, residents gradually moved toward the Ile de la Cité for protection. Defensive walls were built using materials from abandoned Roman structures, marking the beginning of Paris as a fortified island settlement. Over time, the name evolved from Lutetia to Civitas Parisiorum, and eventually to Paris. After the fall of Rome in the 5th century, the region entered a turbulent era marked by invasions, including those by the Franks. Paris survived these challenges, partly due to leadership and protection attributed to figures like Saint Genevieve, later canonized for her role in defending the city. By the late 5th century, the Franks had taken control of much of Gaul, laying the groundwork for the future French state. Under King Clovis I, Paris gained symbolic importance as a royal center. However, during the Carolingian period, other cities temporarily overshadowed it in political influence. From the 9th century onward, Paris faced repeated Viking raids as Norse forces sailed up the Seine to plunder the city. After paying ransoms in some instances, the city eventually fortified its defenses. These efforts helped preserve Paris and strengthen its strategic importance. With the rise of the Capetian dynasty in 987, Paris began a steady transformation into the heart of the French kingdom. Over the Middle Ages, it developed into a major cultural, religious, and political center. The Ile de la Cité housed royal authority, while the left bank became a center of learning and religion, home to monasteries and the early University of Paris, founded around 1150. The right bank, meanwhile, emerged as a commercial hub filled with markets, workshops, and merchant activity. By the late 12th century, population growth led King Philip II to construct a large stone wall around the city, strengthening its defenses and expanding its structure. He also commissioned the Louvre fortress. one of the most ambitious projects of this period was the construction of Notre Dame Cathedral, begun in 1163, which would take nearly 2 centuries to complete. Later, King Louis IX built Sainte-Chapelle in the 13th century to house sacred Christian relics. By the early 14th century, Paris had become the largest city in Europe, with a population approaching 200,000. Yet, despite its growth, medieval life remained harsh. Society was divided into strict classes, with widespread poverty among laborers, craftsmen, and peasants. Disease was common, and the Black Death of 1348 killed tens of thousands. War also shaped the city's history. During the 100 Years' War, Paris suffered occupation and conflict, including periods of English control in the early 15th century before eventually returning to French rule. The Renaissance brought renewal. Under King Francis I, Paris expanded culturally and intellectually, with new architecture, printing presses, and academic institutions. By the late 16th century, however, religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants led to violent wars, including the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. In the 17th century, kings such as Henry IV and Louis XIII worked to rebuild and modernize Paris, adding bridges, institutions, and cultural foundations that would shape the city's identity. Later, Louis XIV moved the royal court to Versailles, but Paris continued to grow as a center of population and commerce. By the 18th century, Enlightenment ideas spread through cafes and salons, influencing thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau. Rising economic pressure and political dissatisfaction eventually led to the French Revolution in 1789. The monarchy was overthrown, and King Louis XVI was executed in 1793. After years of turmoil, Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power in 1799, stabilizing France and transforming Paris into an imperial capital filled with monuments and grand infrastructure. Following Napoleon's fall, Paris experienced repeated political shifts, revolutions, and regime changes throughout the 19th century. Under Napoleon III and Baron Haussmann, the city was extensively rebuilt with wide boulevards, modern sanitation, and new districts that define Paris today. Despite progress, the city endured major crises, including the Franco-Prussian War, the Paris Commune, and severe economic hardship. Yet it also entered a cultural golden age known as the Belle Époque, becoming a global center for art, fashion, science, and innovation. The 20th century brought further challenges, including 2 world wars. Paris was occupied during World War II, suffering hardship and resistance before liberation in 1944. In the post-war era, the city rebuilt once again, welcoming immigration, modernization, and cultural revival. Today, Paris stands as one of the world's most iconic cities, shaped by thousands of years of transformation, survival, and reinvention, continuously rising through history as a global center of culture, politics, and human achievement.